So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Thursday, December 6, 2018 session in our series on AI and Smart Physical Systems. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford, and we're very happy to welcome everyone here. Thanks to our member companies, specifically Bridgestone Corporation, Kawasaki Heavy Industries, Brilliant Hope Incorporated, Mitsubishi Research Institute, and Ritsumeikan University. We will have some refreshments afterward, and we hope that you'll stay afterward and talk to each other and get to know everybody a little bit better. Today, for the final session in our series, I'm very happy to be able to welcome Jim Adler, who is the Managing Director and founder of Toyota AI Ventures. He's also an executive advisor at the Toyota Research Institute. So Jim started out Toyota AI Ventures in the middle of 2017 after TRI had been going on for about a year and a half. Before the AI Venture started, Jim was the Vice President of Data and Business Development for Toyota Research Institute. Before that, Jim was the Vice President of Products and Marketing at Metanautics, which is a big data analytics startup that received Sequoia funding, and Workday, which was acquired by Microsoft. Before that, Jim was Vice President of Data Systems and the Chief Privacy Officer at Intellius, which was acquired by HIG Capital. Jim also founded Vote Here, which is a pioneering company in cryptographic, secure, and secret online voting for public elections that received funding from Cisco Systems and HP. He started his career as a rocket engineer at Lockheed Martin. And I'm really delighted that Jim can come and talk to us informally about how he sees the landscape for AI developing across Asia. I'd like to start off, though, with asking you to kind of put together your story a little bit and tell us how one leads to the next. Tell us about your background and also a little bit more about what the ventures are doing.
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me, especially the last, at least, seminar of the quarter. I really appreciate it. Clearly, from that introduction, I can hold a job or a boss, which is somewhat true. I'm an electrical engineer by training. I love systems, both physical and information and business systems. And my career that's sort of the through line of my career. I came out of school, launched rockets for the first half dozen years of my career, loved it intensely. It was, of course, so exciting for a kid coming out of school to sit at the bottom of a 300-foot booster and have $1 billion of payload at the top of it, and have a general ask you, "Are you ready? Are you ready to go?" And you know, what do I know? I'm 26 years old. Yes, sir, is really all I can mutter at the time. But I really sought some entrepreneurial pursuits, which, if you have listened to that career, it was really about a startup and then exiting either successfully or not, and then resting, and then startup and resting, and startup and resting, because startups are tough and they're emotionally draining, but they're wonderful, and some of the best journeys and rewarding times of my life have been in the cauldron of a startup. And when we sold the last company to Microsoft, it was my time to rest. So one of the co-founders of Metanautics went to school here at Stanford with the Chief Technology Officer of Toyota Research Institute, James Kuffner. And since Metanautics was sold to Microsoft, of course, Microsoft it was a relatively small company. We had just raised a Series A. We're about to raise a B. They wanted to move us back to Seattle, but I had just spent 20 years raising our kids in Seattle, and the deal I cut with my wife, Robin, who's here actually today, is, and all successful marriages, by the way, I'll give you a marriage tip, periodic renegotiation of the terms of the marriage. And so the negotiation we struck was, she wanted to get out of the rain, and I wanted to do another startup. So we moved to the to Silicon Valley here, and I got to do my startup. She got out of the rain. But who buys us? Microsoft, who wants to move us right back to the rain. So she was not having that. And luckily, the co-founder of Metanautics said, you got to meet James. And I met James and Gil Pratt, who runs the Toyota Research Institute, and just fell in love with the personnel and the vision and the mission, and really what Toyota is facing right now, and the auto industry generally. This level of disruption is really unprecedented in automotive, which I know we're going to talk about more. And so I was brought in to run the data and cloud team because I had done that at Intellius and worked deeply with big data systems at Metanautics. So I said, sure, I know how to build a data science cloud team. I'll certainly do that. Did that for the first year and a half. But Toyota Research had this little kitty of money to do investments, and they were starting to do them. And because I can't keep my mouth shut, I really was a little bit critical of how they were doing them, because I had taken corporate investment in my entrepreneurial past, and I had really good corporate investors, and I had really terrible corporate investors. And I really did not want Toyota to be a terrible corporate investor. And so I made my opinions known to Gil and James and the team, and Gil in the reason he's an amazing leader, he said, okay, smart guy, go fix it. And so I wrote a manifesto of what I think was important for a venture capital fund, to be a separate subsidiary, to have financial incentives that align with the entrepreneurs and the co-investors, to have a clear investment thesis, to treat founders and founding teams as customers, and recognize that financial return precedes strategic return for corporate investing. Usually corporates get it the wrong way. They try to extract the strategic value before the company is viable and successful, and that is a recipe for disaster. So they indulged the prescription and the structure of this fund. It's a $100 million fund. It's focused on seed and early stage investments in AI, data, cloud, autonomous mobility, and robotics. And we have a 5-member board. We're kind of built for speed. One of the most important things I impressed upon Toyota was we need to run at the clock speed of startups. We can't expect startups to run at the clock speed of Toyota. And the beautiful part of that was the leadership of Toyota, all the way up to Akio Toyoda, totally gets that. And they were completely supportive of that. So we set up a 5-member board. There's 7 executive vice presidents at Toyota. 2 of them are on my board, Gil Pratt and Tomoyama-san, and myself, an outside board member, and another TRI executive, Kelly Kay. And we move really quickly. We've, since, as Richard said, July 2017, we've done 17 deals. We've announced 13 of them. We're running at about a deal a month, roughly. And we're getting into some really exciting opportunities.
So to follow up, the fund, the $100 million, is all Toyota money, right?
So it's an LP structure.
Yeah.
And effectively a single LP.
Okay,
Right.
but are you co-investing most of the time, or?
Yeah, we lead deals.
Okay.
We've led a couple deals. We tend to follow more than lead. Our average check size is $2 million. We've gone as high as 8. We've gone as low as $250K. So pretty wide variance, but kind of the sweet spot is about a couple million, $2 to $3
I really
million.
liked your point about saying that financial return has to precede strategic return. But surely when you're looking at investments, you're considering the strategic possibilities at the same time, right?
Yes, and I think the thesis is informed strategically. Right?
Okay.
That's why we're investing in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
But there always is this conversation at the board level, at the investment committee level, that every time we do a deal, the question always is, well, how's this strategic for Toyota? And we usually have that wrestling match inside the investment committee meeting, which I think is the right place to have it. If you don't have it there, you end up having it in the boardroom of the startup, which is the worst place to have it, or by coercing or influencing the founding team to do what you want. That never is good. Startups are incredibly delicate and incredibly powerful, but in the early stages, they need to be treated with a measure of distance, and especially from someone like Toyota or any big company, really. So yes, we decide those strategic contours really in the investment committee meetings.
So things are moving so rapidly and kind of, I'd say, in an uncertain direction in industries like the automotive industry. Are you doing, how do you do the process for mapping out strategic space and kind of looking at new areas to invest in?
Yeah, well, I think one of the advantages we have is that because we're a subsidiary of Toyota Research Institute, we have some of the best researchers and engineers in robotics and autonomy right next to us. And so we do get this osmotic feed of where the problems are, where the opportunities might lie. They're at the cutting edge, the bleeding edge of a lot of these innovations. If you think about the autonomy stack, it kind of breaks into three general areas. There's perception, which is sensors and what is the world, and then prediction, what will the world be, and then finally planning, what will I do in the world. And that applies to a predictive analytics system for business process all the way to a physical system like a car. And then underneath that stack, that layered stack, is tools, compute, edge, cloud, all the infrastructure to execute those layers of the stack.
So right now, are you seeing things in one of those layers as being more interesting than others, or equal?
Oh yeah, no, they're not equal. I wish it was that easy. We do, one of the things that we think that perception is a lot of the, we think that is soon to be a solved problem. The theoretical underpinnings have by and large been solved. Now you have to, of course, execute and productize and package and ride that cost efficiency curve down. Planning also is a little bit more difficult, but we see innovations there.
So on the perception side,
yep.
When you say it's about to be solved, LiDAR is still kind of, developing, right?
Yes.
So in terms of, you're looking on a, say, 7 or 8 year timeline, or what kind of a timeline are you looking at?
Yeah, well, I think the question is the productization of that layer is happening now. So will it be just LiDAR? Will it be LiDAR? Will it be radar? Will it be cameras? Will it be some interesting new sensor? That's all the input to this fusion layer, which will actually detect and parse the environment for these sensors.
Okay.
So I mean, that part, from a research perspective, I think it's under
At least the problems are known.
They're known, right?
Yeah.
Because if you look at the prediction layer, I don't think we even have scratched the surface. And that is where, especially on roads, because there's not just other robotic cars on the road. There's human-driven cars and pedestrians and bicyclists, and it's a social ballet of sort of social contract of what everyone's allowed to do and should do and does do, and all of that also is locally defined. So what works in Palo Alto may not work in New York City, may not work in Riyadh, may not work in Tokyo, may not work in Shenzhen.
Yeah.
So how do we teach these machines to interact with humans?
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
So in that regard, are you seeing more of the weight going into the car or more of the weight going into, say, intelligent transportation systems, the infrastructure?
So if your question is like vehicle to infrastructure kind of thing, I think that we, as an automaker, we see a lot going into the car.
Okay.
I think that's something that we can control and we have influence over. It's not to say that certain governments and public policy groups will put more infrastructure in and make our problem easier. We're just not relying on that.
Yeah. So with regard to any of these areas, and I don't want to ask for information that's still confidential, but are there new developments that you think are really kind of neat?
Yeah, every day, every day. there's so much going on in this, and not just at Toyota, but across. That's why we're investing, because there's so much innovation happening, and it's being fueled by a tremendous influx of venture capital, both from institutions and corporates. I mean, we just made an investment in this company, Perceptive Automata, around prediction, and they are actually using psychoanalytic models, sociographic models to model what goes on the road. And it's so deceptively difficult, because when you're in a car, you do project your mentality into every actor around you. My favorite example is an unprotected left turn. If you know, an unprotected left turn is when you need to make a left turn and there's no stop sign, there's no light. You have to cross a lane of traffic, and then someone's got to let you in. Very difficult. My personal rule of thumb is always jump in front of a car that's nicer than yours. They tend to let you in. Hard when you're driving a Lexus, though.
Yeah, and I do appreciate what you say, because in some parts of Asia, it's the car that's 1 centimeter ahead has the right of way.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it is really this social contract of how you negotiate all this, and how do we teach machines to do that? I think we're just getting started. I remember Gil Pratt had said at one point to a team meeting, he said, what's so fascinating about this field is that, yes, we're teaching these machines, but we're going to learn as much about ourselves as we teach these machines. And that is, I think, so true in some very distinct ways. Like our own prior experience is how we understand the world. And what you teach a machine is how they are going to see the world. There's a sense that machines are perfect and neutral. They are not. They're just like us. They're a product of their experience, and they have biases.
So in that regard, what would you say is kind of the most difficult steps between now and a world in which autonomous vehicles are mixed with people driving their own cars?
Well, I think the challenge with mobility is first safety, and how safe does it need to be? How safe do these systems need to be accepted? It's a really difficult question, and one that technologists and companies cannot solve alone. It will require a societal conversation to really answer that question. I mean, 40,000 people die in the United States from car crashes every year.
Yeah.
If autonomous driving dropped that by half, would that be enough? It may not be, because we are very intolerant to machines making mistakes that hurt us. We're very tolerant of people hurting us, because I think we're empathetically put ourselves in the position of the person and say, oh, I could have made that mistake. So we're much more empathetic to people than we are to machines. So these machines are going to have to be much, much better than human drivers for us to accept them. And we are going through that process now.
Any idea about timing?
Yeah, it's because it's a societal policy question. I don't really know. I do know that there's different approaches to the problem.
Yeah.
So let me come at it from that angle, since I can't predict what governments will do. If you look at some of the larger autonomy efforts, their focus is to drive as many miles as they can on as many roads in as many weather conditions as possible, and then one day flip the switch and say we're ready. I think a year or two ago, Google Waymo said, "Hey, we crossed 1 million miles," or maybe it was 3 million miles a couple years ago, and then recently it was 10 million miles. Well, how many miles is enough? Rand says it's 8 billion miles. We have a company called May Mobility that is driving fixed routes in certain urban areas, and their operating design domain, their ODD, is very narrow. So they've really constrained the problem to being so simple that they can drive it autonomously, or soon will. And they drive the same route 200 times a day. So they see everything they need to see on that route. They see it in all weather. They see it in all lighting conditions. They see it with construction. They understand all the pedestrians and bicyclists. So they could really deeply manage the safety requirements.
Yeah.
They can even put, to your point, Richard, about infrastructure, they can even put sensors at intersections because they drive the route a couple hundred times a day.
Sure.
So they can put a LiDAR or a camera where they need it even to look around the corner.
Yeah.
So I think that's a much more viable approach to growing this set of operational design domains, operating design domains, instead of trying to boil the ocean and then just one day say, it's ready. I just don't think that's as viable.
So you're going back and forth to Japan a lot. Are you sourcing your deals from Asia as well as from the U.S., or most of them coming from Silicon Valley, or what do you say about that?
So far, it's been Silicon Valley, Boston. We have a deal in Montana, some great LiDAR guys up there. We have a deal in London and in Tel Aviv, Israel.
Okay.
We haven't done a deal yet in Japan. We are partnered with the Mirai Creation Fund out of Tokyo. And so we've co-invested with them on several deals.
Okay.
Toyota's a limited partner in that fund, so we get some collaboration through that vehicle.
So Mirai, how many investments would you say are through them?
I think we've done 4 or 5, I think.
Okay.
Through them.
Okay.
So good
Well,
chunk.
are you looking around at the landscape in Asia? How
We
are
are
things developing?
Yeah, we are. Of course, China is undeniable and is not to be ignored for reasons we can talk about. I think Japan is beginning to really wake up to the opportunity. It's the 3rd largest economy in the world. They have a role to play. Great universities. Happen to have one of the best car makers right there in their backyard.
We won't ask which one, right? Yeah, okay.
And so I think Japan will definitely be a growing force in the space.
Now, you mentioned China and said we can talk about it. I was really impressed how many autonomous vehicle companies there are in China.
Yeah.
Are you looking at that landscape? It looks really hot. It almost looks like it's too hot.
It's very hot and very expensive. There's a tremendous amount of venture capital chasing too few deals. So it's all supply and demand, and the prices are sky high.
Okay.
So, but with 1.4 billion people and 2nd largest economy in the world, I don't think China can be ignored, of course. And I also think that what the U.S. Benefited from with the auto industry, where the U.S. automakers were really just able to serve their local markets in the early days. China can just serve their local market, and they'll just be fine.
And do fine.
And they can mature in their market, and then export and do more as they mature. And I think that's an undeniable advantage, just like it was for the U.S.
One of the points that's come up several times when we've had content about China in this series is sort of the attitudes and how they're reflected in regulation, and that people are actually more accepting of AI solutions in China than they are here. Here you suddenly get people worried about privacy, you get people worried about, individual empowerment, and that's not part of the discussion in China. Are you seeing that kind of cultural difference as something that will really be an important impact or have an important impact in the way the business sector develops?
Definitely. I spend obviously a lot of time in Japan, and if you look at just adoption of robots in Japan, they're welcomed. And here our uncanny valley is very wide here in the United States, and in Japan it's relatively narrow. And I think one of the reasons why Toyota is such an amazing automaker is Toyota understands how empowering an object can be for people, even if it's not anthropomorphic. I mean, when you hit the accelerator in a car, you just get this rush of autonomy and agency, and Toyota really understands that. And I think that transfers to other objects, other robots, that there is a connection that we humans have to things in our world. And I think a big mistake that many roboticists make is that they try to construct a robot that looks like a person. And we have an investment in a company out of Israel that it's called LEQ, and it doesn't look like a person at all. It's a social companion for older adults. We know that, especially in Japan, aging society is a huge problem there. The age dependency ratio is getting worse and worse. It's going to be 4 retirees to every 5 non-retirees in about 40 years, I think, maybe 60 years, 4 to 5. And so you can't institutionalize all these people.
Yeah.
We all would like to age in place. And I think if you look at this robot, it just looks like a smart lamp, right? It just got no eyes, has a light, but it does articulate and it does emote, but it doesn't emote like a person, it emotes like an object. And it's getting amazing reviews because it's not trying to do too much. A car does something very narrow but very well, and we have affection for it.
So the example of this company indicates that you're investing outside the automobile space.
Definitely.
So you're looking at service robots and other kind of physical systems too.
That's right. We don't know what's next for Toyota. Part of the mission is Toyota is a top 10 consumer brand in the world, the best design and manufacturer automaker in the world. But what's next? We don't know. There's quite a bit of disruption hitting the auto industry. And really, an autonomous vehicle is just a really big wheeled robot.
So this is one of the hardest things for any large company when you're looking at new opportunities and trying to figure out how you might start a new business line or whatever. Can you say anything about your discussions with the Toyota executives, and have you seen things that you've talked about wind up showing up in strategic plans or anything so far?
Well, I think that I do a lot. I think that like all large companies that are going through an era of disruption, as Clay Christensen from Harvard Business School has taught us, innovators have a dilemma. How do they jump from the limits that they've hit in their market success to the next era of their market success? I often give the example of Kodak, where in the 70s, their market cap was about $30 billion. They invented digital photography. 20 years later, Facebook and Apple created about $1 trillion of market cap, primarily on the backs of digital photography. The phone takes the pictures and Facebook distributes them. Those are the killer apps. And meanwhile, Kodak filed bankruptcy and is now worth about $150 million, down from $30 billion. How did Kodak miss digital photography? It's not that they weren't smart. They were just focused on their business. And their business was film. And they couldn't see past film.
Actually, that's a really interesting case study because at the same time, Fuji Film in Japan really started investing in biotech and is really almost more of a biotech company now than they are.
Right.
Certainly camera film is not much for
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's the challenge for automotive is when you see this high-tech insurgency coming, how do you become high-tech before high-tech becomes automotive? And you're seeing this now. The insurgents are Google and Apple and Amazon and Tesla and NVIDIA, Intel. These are the companies that are coming to automotive. And what is the automotive industry's response? Well, the reason we created this fund is to tap into that disruption, kind of understand it a little better, and what can we learn from it? Startups are experiments in the marketplace. And we want to run these experiments. We want these companies to be successful. We may want to, at some point, acquire some of the capabilities of these companies after they've been appropriately de-risked and pay top dollar to pay market prices for them. Cisco's been running this playbook for 30 years. And I think it works. It helps you disrupt yourself before you get disrupted.
So kind of my last question before we open things up to the audience is in this era of disruption and therefore of great uncertainty, would you have recommendations for how a company can best cope and also how individuals like students can best cope?
Yeah, sure. It depends from a company perspective, then I'll get personal. From a company perspective, a company evolves by adopting new capabilities, whether they're built or bought. And those new capabilities open up new opportunities to satisfy new customers and deliver value to customers. And so companies need to figure this out. So now if you have, Mark Andreessen famously said, right, 2011, software is eating the world. Yes, now cars are on the menu. And those companies that likely will succeed will be the ones that are more data native and software native. So how does a Toyota become more data native? And it's a cultural thing.
So data native as opposed to data driven. I'm curious about your choice of words there.
Yeah, because I think data driven means using data to inform your business. Data native means you just think in data. The best example I have is when I first came.
That becomes the unit of value, the currency.
That's right. And it's a balance sheet asset. So when I first came to Toyota, I was very excited because I was a data guy. And I thought, wow, Toyota, market leader, must have a ton of data. And it took me about 3 months of asking around, where's the data? I know we have the data. And, folks in the company are like, what do you mean? What data? What are you talking about data? I'm like, come on, you're Toyota. There must be tons of data. And sure enough, it took me 3 or 4 months, and in a bunker under Nagoya, I found the mother lode of data. And it was collected over decades. And it's not that anyone's trying to hide anything. It's just they didn't realize that this data was an asset. It was great dash cam data. A lot of it was labeled, and it was an asset that could be used to train our machine learning models. Now, of course, they're not thinking that way because they've been using it as test data to verify the system.
Well, when a lot of it was taken, machine learning models was not a consideration.
Exactly, but you could repurpose it, and the point is, this is an asset. And so when you're data native, you think about your data assets as balance sheet value, and that's the difference.
So that's likely to continue.
Yeah, and I think, and then you have to build the culture around this data nativity is about culture. It's about having data scientists, data engineers, business people articulate and live within this data world and reward that, right? Culture is what you reward. If you only reward the hardware engineers, you're going to get a hardware company. Right? If you reward data, facility, and capability, well, then you're going to get a data company. And so that's really what the challenge is for this transition for some of these.
So that's on the company side. Individually, how do you deal with this kind of continual disruption? Yeah,
well, so I'm sure you've read the Kai-Fu Lee book. I'm reading it now, and I find it really interesting that there's he thinks about this in at least 2 axes: the creativity axis and the compassion axis, and we're just beginning to figure this out. I don't think those are the only 2 axes, and so I come from a line of physicians. I broke my grandfather and my father's heart by not becoming a physician. When I said to my dad I was going to become an engineer, he thought I was going to drive a train. He wasn't quite sure what an engineer was. But I took one really important lesson from both of them, is that you're a student your whole life. And things are going to change rapidly. And in order to be a creative force, as Kai-Fu Lee talks about, in order to be a creative force and a humanitarian, you have to have that sensitivity and that willingness to change and be creative your whole career. And so I learned a lot in college, but the most important thing I learned was how to learn and where to pick up wisdom. And I've been doing it. That's why I can't hold a job, because I get interested in a new thing and I want to pour myself into it. I mean, people say, Jim, why are you at Toyota? You're a startup guy. I'm finding Toyota to be a startup. I mean, they are going through this transition, and I find it incredibly invigorating for some weird reason. And it's like this, n-dimensional chess of how do you get this company to not become a Kodak.
Well, you're also at the intersection point of one of the most interesting sides of innovation right now.
That's right.
Which is where the big company is trying to get information from outside, knowledge from outside, trying to come up with new partnerships, trying to do open innovation.
That's right. And I think, so let me be more specific for what can you do. Being a bit of a polymath is really helpful. Understand some technology. You got to be able to have skills. Right? Whether it's mathematical skills, software skills, writing skills, communication, those are so important to hone maniacally. Because at the end of the day, that's what you bring to the party. That's what you bring to the table. But then everyone is part of a team, right? There's no. I hate cultures that are, pardon the gender specificity, but cowboy cultures, right? The hero culture. Hero cultures are the worst because you reward someone solving a problem that often they created, right? I call it the arsonist firefighter, right? And what you want is a team. You don't want heroes. You don't want cowboys. You want a team that communicates well, that understands the positions. When I lead a team, I never talk about family. Most families are dysfunctional, right? So I'm like, we're not a family. We're a team, right? And everyone has a position. And we are trying to score points, whatever the game is. And we all have a position, and we all stumble, and we can't play always at 150%. And that's okay. But we all have to rely on each other. And I think that's a much better model to deal with the influx of entropy and change and competition in order to be successful.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. I can't let it go. So I do think that there is this kind of archetype behind business in Asia that it's basically an extension of the Confucian family. And when we talk about team, I'm curious if our ideas of team really are the same ideas of team that Asian people would come up with.
That's a great point.
When you say team, what kind of sport just is in the back of your mind?
Well, I grew up, so in I'm going to date myself. So I grew up in Miami, Florida. So, the Miami Dolphins had their perfect season, I think, in 72, 73. So I'm a football fan forever.
Yeah, okay.
And so I studied Vince Lombardi and the great coaches. And so I think about it that way, that everyone works 7 days a week. We do work hard, but there is game day. But I think it translates to any team sport for sure.
Yeah.
And even individual sports, I think it's still all out there.
Now the interesting thing about it is, and I've looked at this, is football has great indeterminacy once the play starts.
Right.
And you really don't know what's going to happen. And people may have to do something totally different than their usual position. That almost never happens in baseball.
That's right.
If the ball is hit down the first base line, you know where the second baseman's going to go.
That's right.
And that's, I think, fundamental to our sense of how to deal with uncertainty.
That's a great point, and I didn't think about it that way, which is why I love football. And I'm not a huge baseball fan, but I come from a long line of baseball fans.
But for the Europeans in the audience, let me point out that soccer is even more amazing because these people know where each other are without looking.
That's right. That's right.
And that's right.
Just, and actually, probably soccer is a better example. Because it's continuous, and you have positions. There's these exogenous events that kind of impose themselves, and that you have to deal with, and you have to pull together. And I love both those dynamics.
Well, having gotten us arguably kind of far away from AI and smart physical systems,
I don't think it's that far, actually.
Let's say thanks.